What's up guys, and in today's video I'm going to be going through how I'm actively setting and achieving hard goals. Like I said, with these videos, the main mission is just basically to show how builds raw and real, to show you the good, the bad, the ugly, what I'm actively implementing in terms of mental models, the frameworks that I'm also implementing, what's working, what's not working, and ultimately just scaling that up into the future, and also just to solve problems within businesses and organizations, basically to be the chief problem solver, to come in, fix things that need to be fixed, and ultimately build infrastructure on the back end. And also just to call in visionaries, basically people that understand what it is that we're actively striving for and solving for, and ultimately building a network of cool people doing cool things at the same time. So I thought I'd do a little things a little bit different and just ultimately just start with how goals define me, who I am, before we jump into the 5 simple steps that I normally have. And this ultimately just goes down to who I am. I'm 22 years old from Africa, architecting systems that kill chaos and build generational impact. I think this is who I am and what I want to strive towards. And I think that ultimately just having this mission and this persona of saying, hey, who I am is ultimately this is who I am, 22 years old from Africa, and this is exactly what I want to do, which is to create generational impact in terms of solving problems. And the mode or the vehicle that I have discovered that to be working recently is ultimately just solving problems within businesses and organizations, and ultimately just building infrastructure in the back end. And when I say recently, I mean like within the past 2 3 years, and ultimately just building up from that and saying, hey, why hard goals, why are they so important? Hard goals like 100 days of videos, so now I'm gonna bump it up from 30 days to 100 days of videos. So basically just posting every single day for 100 days straight is ultimately just gonna allow me to reshape the industries, because if I can't actively do this, how do I expect to then scale that up into the future? Saying, hey, what I'm actively doing right now, setting 100 days of daily videos, is ultimately nothing compared to what it is that is our main vision and our main goal. And ultimately just saying, retrain my brain to lead under pressure. So hey, if I can't show up today, how do I expect to lead a nation tomorrow? Because I want to set the most difficult hard goals and actively build towards that. And if I can't start with doing 100 videos a day, well, how do I expect to get into the ultimate goals that I do have for us and also the business as well? And ultimately saying, hey, what's at stake? My legacy. I'm not waiting for validation. I don't need any praises or any applause. I'm still in the trenches and I still have a very long way to go, and I'm very aware of that. And I know that the journey is going to be far more exciting than the final destination. And I know that the most important thing is just to enjoy that we're in the trenches and that we're actively engineering breakthroughs, and this is how we're actively doing it. It all starts in one place, and I think with these videos, just documenting what it is that we're actively doing is gonna help us scale and build those mental models into the future. So enough of that. So let's get into the tactical breakdown. Like I said, I always break these down into 5 simple steps, and how I set and solve hard goals is ultimately broken down into 5 steps that I want to talk to you about, which is number one, pick goals that ultimately scare you, that make you so scared that you have to hit them. I think Elon Musk talks about this when he says you need to wake up in the morning and be excited about the future, which I also believe, because if you waking up and you're not excited about the future, what is the whole point in actively striving to build hard things and building cool things at the same time? Because I think just ultimately just having that framework of saying, hey, I want to actively build something that scares me because it's so big, but ultimately if I know that within myself I can strive towards that, to say, hey, I am Fari and these are the things that define me. And I think that's why the first point was super important just to lay out, because it ultimately just is the foundation or the starting point of every single thing that's just ultimately just going to be scaled up into the future in terms of solving problems and the things that scare me the most, at least. And saying, hey, why easy goals build nothing, to say, hey, if things were smooth sailing, you ultimately lead to comfort. And I, as my age and what I'm doing at the moment, comfort is not something that I'm leaning more towards, because I know the most discomfort that I can put myself in is where I'm going to experience the most amount of growth. And saying, hey, scary forges leaders, to ultimately say, hey, the scarier it is, or the more I feel intensely about things, it means that it is only forging me as a leader, and I need to make sure that I'm actively striving to solve those hard problems and saying, hey, if I want to live up to the name of being called chief problem solver, I need to be able to solve these problems, but I also need to also have mental models and frameworks that I'm actively learning from. And it's only gonna be from this time or this phase in my life when I'm still young. If I'm gonna be solving even harder problems, I need to make sure that these phases are my golden years in order to fail as much as possible and fast, and ultimately iterate as fast as possible as well. And saying, hey, my move is 100 days of videos. We've got 34 down, which is super good. I didn't think I was gonna get this far, but ultimately it's been so much fun. I didn't think I was gonna enjoy it this much, but saying, hey, it's brutal, but it's making me the guy who shows up no matter what. Ultimately, these videos have not been easy to make each and every single day. It's been throwing me out of my comfort zone, simply because I just never expected to be making 34 days worth of content each and every single day, thinking of new ideas, learning how to communicate those ideas and breaking them down into one document that ultimately just allows me to share my ideas and my thought process, so that later on into the future I can then review it and ultimately just say, hey, from here, this is what I was getting wrong and this is how I was thinking about things, and ultimately saying, hey, like, the way that I was thinking about things in the beginning was wrong, and that's okay. Ultimately, how can I scale from that and lead to the closest source of truth, to ultimately strive to be building towards the source of truth, and ultimately just saying, hey, we're still young and we're still learning, but we have to keep going. That's the most important thing. And saying, hey, the key question here, well, the first principles question, I thought I'd just switch it up, which is, what goal scares you but could rewrite your future, to ultimately say, what is the one goal that you could set today and ultimately say, hey, this is gonna rewrite your future because it scares you, and at the same time, because it scares you, it ultimately motivates you to wake up each and every single day and attack, attack, attack. For us, for me at least at the moment, it's ultimately just to solve really big problems within businesses and organizations, to be, hey, we are the chief problem, or I'm the chief problem solver, and I'm going to make sure that I eliminate chaos and I stop that friction that stops businesses from growing. And how do we actively measure and track that? And just being super obsessed of saying, hey, how can we create the most amount of value is in terms of how we're tracking the impact that we have, and also just asking the questions of saying, hey, how can we better our product, how can we reimagine our product, and basically thinking, hey, I want the future of Chaos Killing, or Chaos OS, like I like to say as a nickname, to be XYZ. And that future, actively just building towards it, rather than having a picture of saying, hey, everyone else has done this, so why don't we do the same thing? But I believe and I know that just by having my own vision of saying, hey, I want to reshape chaos and just ultimately be the backends guy and just solve problems, and I have this vision that I want to strive for that, and ultimately just building that, I know we're gonna get there. And ultimately it's just gonna be so hard, but I know that in the end it's gonna be so worth it. And then ultimately just engineering systems to force the wind, to say, hey, willpower's a myth, systems are king. I think even in the early phases, just ultimately just understanding systems that allow you to scale. What are the things that help you and your business? What are the systems that you could implement that free up your time to create leverage, are ultimately just gonna force the win within your business and organization. And I'm super bullish on this, to say, hey, we need to make sure that we are understanding how systems work from a first principles basis, that we're understanding the first element and then reasoning up from there, and saying, hey, my move is to blast 50 plus Lemless emails a day, or my team, each team member needs to blast 50 emails a day, and then use Airtable for lead scoring. So hey, basically booking 10 calls a day per 10 calls a week. Sorry, it's making sure that we're booking 10 calls a week, and saying, hey, systems make hard goals inevitable, because you can only do so much by doing through manual input, and ultimately that manual input is not scalable. No matter how hard you try to scale manual input, you're ultimately just gonna burn a lot of cash if you're trying to do that, because you're gonna be hiring out people, or you're just gonna be doing things that are ultimately just getting a bunch of tools that ultimately don't allow you to scale, and you're just going to be burning cash and time that you could be using, or your competitors could be using in other areas that ultimately allow them to scale. And I like to think about this and say, hey, how can we actively solve for this? Because one of the things that I have realized recently in our offer, or what it is that we're actively solving for, is that a lot of friction comes from saying, hey, we've done XYZ in the past like this, why would we want to switch? But ultimately just showing that and just having a measurement in terms of how we calculating ROI, in terms of are we quantifying it in terms of time and revenue loss that they're having simply by having their existing systems, and how can we actively implement our new systems and ultimately just scale that up for them, and in the way that how we actively just communicate that. But yeah, that's enough about that. So saying, hey, what is the key question? What's the simplest system to unlock your goals? Ultimately just asking, hey, if we were able to remove this manual input of data, how would that ultimately just unlock your system to do a lot more, whether internally or externally for our clients, and ultimately just building for that. And then saying, hey, the third point, which is track the numbers, data online, ultimately saying, hey, data is your input, and I'm such a big data's guy to say, hey, we ultimately need to just understand the data, what is happening within the business each and every single day, because if you don't understand the data, you're not going to know how to basically improve, iterate where you're lacking, and ultimately just understanding as well from an MVP perspective, like if you're running a system that you've just rolled out, how is the feedback, how is everything going on, are people understanding how to use it, are people not understanding how to use it, which we actually just strive for in terms of getting data in terms of every single aspect. I think data is one of the most important things, and saying, hey, data keeps you honest and focused, ultimately saying if you're focused and you have data, you're ultimately going to win, and you're going to increase your probability of success, simply because you have a guided missile rather than a scattered missile that just shoots and then it aims every single way. We're saying, hey, data is ultimately going to guide us in terms of landing where we need to land to, and ultimately keeps us honest and focused. And then saying, hey, what's the move? Data Google Studio tracks video views. Hey, we have 44,000, or we have 44,000 in total. And saying, hey, email replies from 4% to 6%. How has that increase gone? Is it the messaging? Is it the positioning? And it ultimately leads us to understand, hey, this is our compass, and we need to make sure that this is guiding what it is that we're actively implementing. In terms of if we make any changes, we know that the data is guiding us. In terms of these videos as well, how is the data guiding us in terms of the hooks? Are we actively positioning the solution that we have, and also the messaging and the positioning, either titles, thumbnails, whatever it is? But yeah, and ultimately just solving for that and saying, hey, the key question is what number proves you're winning? Ultimately just having one to three metrics that ultimately guide your definition of success. What is success in your definition, in your eyes? What are the three metrics that prove that you're ultimately winning? And what are the KPIs that you need to set in order to keep track of those, that ultimately lead to you saying, hey, we're actively leading? And then saying, hey, steal wisdom from mentors, which is super important to ultimately say, hey, mentors are your shortcut to mastery. I am super bullish on investing in mentors. I think this is the number one thing that I am actively just pumping a lot more into. I have been pumping a lot into it before in the past few years, but now I think I'm just going to be scaling that up. I'm going to be 10xing what it is that I'm going to be doing, and I know that as I'm pumping it up, I'm also going to have systems in place that ultimately structure how much time and energy I'm spending towards that, because I know it's going to be a lot of time. It's going to be a lot time consuming going out and meeting with mentors, or going to masterminds and doing all these things, and ultimately just having systems and frameworks in process for that. I think I'm just going to have to solve for that into the future. But when the time comes, when I'll be attending a lot more events, I will definitely be letting you guys know and saying, hey, don't be afraid to pay for mentors. Like, one of the most important things that has accelerated my growth and the things that I've been able to do is just paying for access to masterminds and people that have that knowledge and that skill set to ultimately say, hey, I want to make sure that I'm actively investing in myself, whether through books, whether through masterminds, whether through mentors, that I'm actively pouring within myself, because ultimately those nuggets that you're going to get from there are ultimately just going to move the needle in ways that you couldn't imagine. So ultimately just always just buying those things, I think, is going to be the number one thing that I'm going to be actively implementing. And saying, hey, what's the key question that I could be asking is who can shortcut your learning curve in half? Basically saying, hey, books are great, books are great to have, and you get a lot of inspiration and knowledge from that, but your problems or the problems that I face on a daily basis are unique to me, and I can't ask the person in the book for those questions that I'm specifically asking for, and understanding that hey, mentors are ultimately going to be people that you can ask to say, hey, I'm trying XYZ out. How is this going? How have you done it? And making sure that they're aligned with the goal and the vision and the mission that you have and are ultimately striving for, because they need to be aligned on the same mission. And I think that's super important. You don't want to be asking for advice from someone that has not led the path that you want to be. I think that's super obvious. And then ultimately leading to the final point, which is turning pain into power. And I think this is super powerful. Why? Is because hard goals hurt. That's the point. That's the whole point of setting hard goals, because if they weren't hard, they wouldn't be painful. And for me, I think one of the things that I've learned recently is ultimately striving for big goals that seem impossible in the beginning, but I know that into the future I'm going to be actively solving for that and saying, hey, pain fuels your vision, and I know that pain's going to fuel my vision through the tough times. When things get tough, I'm just going to be solely just striving and saying, hey, I need to make sure that my pain fuels my vision and ultimately guides what it is that I'm doing, because there has to be a purpose in what it is that I'm actively building for that makes the pain worth it as well. So that saying, hey, I am grinding through for day 34, which is today, and my $100 million vision impact, the level of impact that I want to have in terms of into the future and inspire millions, and also to reshape industries, and saying, hey, I want to change Africa, I want to build rockets, and that stuff keeps me going. It keeps my fire burning. And the first stage to doing that is ultimately killing chaos and building back-end infrastructure, which is a stepping stone to what it is that we're actively going to be doing, or what I'm actively going to be doing, and just striving towards that to say, hey, I'm going to be building this vision, but it ultimately scares me, but at the same time it motivates me to wake up each and every single morning, because I know what I'm striving for, I know what I'm building for, and I know what I absolutely want to hit. And saying, hey, the key question that keeps me going is what vision makes my grind worth it. Ultimately saying, hey, I'm going to make sure that my vision ultimately is tied to my grind, and what vision is ultimately having the main goal that ultimately makes every single thing worth it. For me, it's just say, we should have $100 million worth of impact. We should have we should also inspire millions of people coming up, and also inspire the next generation while reshaping the industry of what I think is possible. And I know that into the future we're only going to get there if we're delusional and we're actively taking action. I know that into the future we're just going to be solving problems, building cool things, and ultimately just creating a lot of value into the future. And I am super excited for this. It was a bit of a long one, I think, and I hope that you guys got some value from it. And yeah, if you guys have any questions, just make sure to pop me over on Instagram or in the comments, and I will make sure to get back to you guys. And if you guys want to connect with me, make sure to check out my X, LinkedIn, Instagram, and also make sure to subscribe as well. And I'll see you guys in the next one.